Hello. Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Pablo from La Plata. We're going to continue with the Heromorpha Symposium, and the next speaker is the Dr. Felipe Moreira, and his work titled Phylogeny of Hydrometridae, Heteroptera Heromorpha, with the establishment of 2 new subfamilies. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. I'm going to talk about today work that was developed in my lab by a PhD student, Isabelle. Unfortunately, she could not come. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Geromorpha, Hydrometridae is kind of a small family with about 130 species globally. And it's much more diverse in the southern hemisphere, especially in Southeastern Asia and South America. And even for those that do know Geromorpha, they are probably only familiar with Hydrometra, which is this first one here. Very long body, very long legs and head, antenna also very long and labium. And that's where most of the diversity is. It's only genus that is also on the northern hemisphere, but besides that we have quite a lot of morphological variation in different genera that we find elsewhere. So currently Hydrometridae is divided into 3 subfamilies. The largest one is Hydrometrinae, which holds Hydrometra, which is around the globe, it's even in Europe and such. But we also have 2 genera that are related to Hydrometra that are found in South America in fast-running waters, especially in the Andes and the Guyana Plateau, which are Bacillometroides and Bacillometra. These are really small genera with 1 species in Bacillometroides and 3 in Bacillometra. And we also have some species that occur in the Pacific Islands and that are completely terrestrial. They live far away from water. There's not even water bodies where they live. So Dolichocephalometra is one. It's found on the Marquesas Islands, and also Chetometra. And these ones are very interesting because they have this really elongated head in Dolichocephalometra especially. And we also have 2 cave-inhabiting genera in Brazil. So they are troglomorphic. They have all these cave-related morphologies. So even compared to other hydrometrids, the antennae are extremely long, the hind legs very long, the labium, and they have the reduced eyes, adapted for living in the dark and so all sorts of things. So it's being described quite recently, and each one has only 1 species. And besides that, we have 9 fossil genera. So actually we have more fossil genera than extant genera, but some of these fossils are probably synonyms and should be dealt with at some point. So another subfamily that we have is smaller, it's Heterocleptinae. It has 2 extant genera and probably 2 fossils that are associated to it, but it's not really clear if they should be there or not. So we have the type genus, which is Heterocleptes, which has an interesting story. It was terrestrial and was described in Redovid, actually. So afterwards, it was moved to different families of Geromorpha, and nobody really knows where it sits. And another genus was described by Niels Andersen in the 70s is Veliometra. Until now, it had only 1 species. So all of these genera, we found a bunch of new species during our work, and Veliometra including. And the last subfamily is Liminobatodinae, which is the one on the left. Only 1 genus, 1 species, Liminobatodes. We don't quite know where it lives. It has only been collected in light traps from Honduras south to northern Brazil. And only females were collected. We have no males so far. So this is what we have right now. And in terms of phylogeny, so Andersen published the first phylogeny for Hydrometridae as a whole in 1977, and based on 29 morphological characters. And at the time, it was used, and he used generic archetypes instead of species as terminal taxa, which nowadays we know it's not ideal, but back then it was common. And he recovered all subfamilies as monophyletic, so we have Heterocleptini at the base here with Veliometra and Heterocleptis, then Limnobatodine with Limnobatodes, next to the Hydrometrine, which is the crown for genera over there. So since then, we had the descriptions of 7 fossil genera, and Andersen did a phylogeny in 2003, including the fossil genera and the extant genera, and he used 18 morphological characters, and it's reasonable because the fossils don't really offer that much in terms of morphology to be explored. And he also used generic archetypes in this case, which is in 2003, which was not really ideal. And he used Macrovelidae as outgroups, and again, he recovered all subfamilies as monophyletic. And there are some inconclusions, like therefore Eocenometra, Protobacillometra, and Bacillometra in the middle of the tree. And since then, his 1977 paper was updated in 2004 with Tom Weyer. Much more characters are used. Instead of 28, it's now 56. But again, the generic archetypes are used. And they recovered the monophyletic Hydrometridae, and again used Macrovelidae as a sister group. They found that Macrovelidae was the sister group. After that, there's been several descriptions of new genera, especially from amber preserved specimens, and all of them recover several combs like that you see that it's not really resolved. The fossils don't offer that much to be worked on. So this one is from 2015, and then this one the next year. So people just used Andersen's matrix and included new genera and didn't do anything really new. So this is the last one from 4 years ago. So you can see the fossil. This was an impressive fossil. So it's not really much to see there, and it's difficult to assess morphological characters. So what we did is that we find that despite of these several phylogenies, there were problems in methods and problems with the use of fossils that don't offer much. So we focused it on the extant taxa and proposed to do a phylogeny for the whole family. And initially it was we were going to use genetic information, but then with the pandemic it was impossible to go to the lab, and we reduced it to morphology alone. So we use it as outgroups for families that are along the phylogenies that have been published are associated with Hydrometridae. So we use 3 species of Hebridae, so Ebrus priscus, Lipogonphus lacuniferus, the one in the middle on top, and then Merhagata ebroides, and also 1 Mesovelidae, Mesovelia musanti, and Macrovelia hornis there. Hermatobates was included last, so it's not in the figure. So for the in-group, we had 14 species of Hydrometra. There's not many morphological variants for this very elongated body plan, and 14 species is more than enough to access a lot of differences in general morphology. And at the specific level, the different species are defined by the shape of male abdominal genitalia and such, and we don't really need to go beyond 14 or 15 species to access that. In Bacillometra, we had 2 species, 2 undescribed species that we are going to publish at some point. We also had Chetometra robusta from the Marquesas Islands, with this very cool head and legs with lots of hairs and such. And Dodecacephalometra, which has this crazy, not only elongated but also very robust head, also from the Marquesas Islands. Cephalometra parida, which is one of the cave inhabitant species. We had 2 species of Speleometra, which is also from caves. One is already described, the other one is new. We had 2 species of Veliometra, including a new species from French Guiana. And Limnobatodes paradoxus, which is the only species of Limnobatodine. And on top of that, we had 2 genera that are new from the Pacific Islands. So in a collaboration with a colleague from Hawaii. We included them. They look more or less like this. It's being published now very soon in Zootaxa. And for the whole assessment of the family, we are currently missing Basilometroides, which has material in the Smithsonian, will be eventually visited, and Heterocleptes, which was in Vienna, and we will talk about that later. So the student went to several collections in Brazil, South America, and got a lot of loans from many different museums, and we also had material coming from Jacob Damgaard from Denmark, who had interesting specimens, and also Dan Polhemous in Hawaii examined material from the Bishop Museum. So most of the material is pinned, but we also have a little bit in alcohol, especially from South American species that we keep in alcohol in the lab, in freezers. So the specimens were identified and measured. There's a lot of characters related to measurements because the body proportions are very important for the taxonomy of this group. And then all the characters were coded using Mesquite. Then we did two types of analysis. First one, parsimony analysis using TNT, no taxon limit, and another one using Bayesian analysis in Mr. Bayes. So from data from the literature plus the examination of 485 specimens, we came out with 110 characters from the body, head, legs, vestiture, measurements, and all kinds of things. It's all, the data is all there, and also the photos and everything. So the first thing we find that hydrometry is not monophyletic as Anderson recovered. So Veliometra, which is a genus of Heterocleptine, is nested together with Macrovelia hornii, which is a macrovelide all over there on top. And there you can see a Veliometra and a Macrovelia. They are quite similar, and they share some synapomorphisms that I'll talk in a bit. So we had 12 most parsimonial trees with 345 steps. The indexes are not ideal so far, but we'll mess around with that later. So this association of Heterocleptine and in Veliometra plus Macrovelide is something that is suspected since the 1950s, 1960s. And China and collaborators, when describing Heterocleptes, and afterwards discovering that it was not a redovid, it was a geromophon, they said that it could be a primitive velioid Macroveline, so already associating Heterocleptes with Macrovelia. And later China, when he published a species of Macrovelide from Chile, Chepuvelia, he again said that Heterocleptes could be related to Macrovelia, and in fact that Heterocleptes could be placed in Macrovelini for several morphological similarities, and also the male genitalia is quite similar. So what we find in our analysis, there are several characters uniting macrovelids with Heterocleptine, especially with Veliometra, which is the one that we do have in hands. So they have ocelli in the head, while hydrometrids do not have. They have a projection in the pleural in the thorax that other hydrometrids also don't have, and they share it with Microvelidae. And they also have this paired carina on the abdomen. So here, Chepuvelia usingeri, which is a Macrovelidae, and there, Veliometra shui, which should be placed in Macrovelidae. And you see also the head proportions are quite similar. So we recovered Hermatobatidae as a sister group of Hydrometridae. And Hermatobatidae is quite a mystery. It's a genus with, it's a family with species that live on coral and rock shores and reefs, and we don't really know how it goes. Depending on the phylogeny, it goes all over Geromorpha. And in 2008, Damgaard recovered it as sister to Hydrometridae. In our work, we recovered again, but then we don't have, for example, Velidae and Geridae yet, which has been associated with Hermatobatidae by Anderson, for example. We will solve that later. So other thing that we discovered is that Hydrometrine is not monophyletic. So we have from Basilometra, which is blue here, all the way to the lower part, we have the traditional hydrometrids more elongated, which are in Hydrometrine, but then the other ones form two clades. The first one is the cave-inhabiting species from Brazil, which we will propose a new subfamily Cephalometrine for that. And the next clade is the species from the Pacific Islands, which we will propose the new subfamily Chetometrine. And interestingly, the initial thought was that in the literature, it's assumed that hydrometrid started from aquatic or semi-aquatic ancestor and then transited and specialized into terrestrial environments. And what we found is exactly the opposite. So these first two clades are completely terrestrial. They do not go to the water. And then you have the Limnobatodes. Okay. Limnobatodes that we don't know where to live. And then you have the aquatic species. So the Bayesian analysis, we recovered more or less the same thing. We have, again, hydrometry day split with valiometer going all the way to the top with macrovalidae. And you have cephalometrine again, but then chetometrine is split into a series of clades leading to limnobatodine plus hydrometrine. And that's something that we need to work on. So now for the future, heteroclepsis has been examined in the Vienna Museum by Isabelle. Bacillometroid she's going to the Smithsonian next semester or next year to do that. And we go back after examining it to the matrix because some characters are oversplitting in the tree and reducing index and such. So they will be reevaluated for noise reduction. We will redo the analysis and we are thinking about it, if it's possible or useful or not, to include the fossils because of the problem of character assessment. So I would like to talk, to acknowledge and thank first Isabelle for doing all the work. I'm just a supervisor. And Dani Takiya, who helped us with the analysis. Jakob and Dan for looking at specimens and for sending us material. Also Herbert Zettel from the Vienna Museum where she examined heterocleptis, and also you for the attention. Thank you very much.
Good. We have 1 minute for one question. Someone? Okay. No questions. Thank you. Yes. The next speaker is Sanju Wang about two alternative mechanisms of truth generation by a mid-leg stroke in semi-aquatic bugs. Comparison of leg kinematics in Harris latiabdominis and Ragovelia distincta.
Thank you. Hi. My name is Sang-Yun Bang, and I'm a PhD student at Seoul National University based in Korea. And my supervisor is Piotr Jablonski. He unfortunately couldn't be here today. So I'll be doing my presentation on one of my earlier works on discussing two different mechanisms of thrust generation in Garomorpha. And I specifically focus on the leg kinematics in Garrus latiadominis and Ragovelia distincta. So Garrus latiadominis and Ragovelia distincta are both under the Garomorphan, and they're subdivided into subfamilies of Ragovelinae and Garinae. And as you can see from the phylogenetic tree, the two of them share the most recent root and hence then subdivided into two separate branches and evolved. And Ragovelia distincta evidently falls under the Ragovelinae subfamily, and Garrus latiadominis falls under the subfamily Garinae. So while all garomorphins employ a generic propulsion mechanism, and they typically employ a combination of hydrodynamic drag and surface tension force that acts on their driving mid-leg, from the collected specimens and digitized films, we were able to confirm that Garrus latiadominis and Ragovelia distincta separately employ two alternative mechanisms when it comes to be the forward propulsion of their body, and we are going to be discussing more about that. Worked, good. So Garrus latiadominis from the family Garridae are medium-sized bugs, and they have a very elongated body and elongated legs. And from the schematic illustration of the cross-section of their legs, we can confirm that when they are static on the water surface, their mid-leg and their foreleg and their hind leg the combination of all three pairs of the legs are supporting its body on the water surface. And this is done by the combination of surface tension force and curvature force. And they're basically supporting themselves by the buoyancy of the water. But once they start skating on the water surface, the dimple that is created by the buoyancy on the water breaks, and the asymmetrical dimple is what efficiently provides them with the surface tension force necessary for them to obtain the forward propulsion they need in the body movement. In addition to that, because they're creating an asymmetrical dimple, we can also consider that dimple as a virtual oar, and that is where the hydrodynamic drag comes to play. And by pushing their leg, they're creating water vortices and water waves on the water surface that can push the insect body forward. Ragovelia distincta are similar sized bugs, and they are typically characterized by prolonged driving middle legs. And from the film, we can confirm that unlike the Gyaris, they have more control over their successive leg joints. So from the Gyaris, their movement is typically just restricted to the coccyx. However, in the Ragovelia, their femur tibia joint and tibia tarsus joints are also moving throughout the stroke. So from that, we were able to confirm that they have more control over their mid-leg successive joints. And from digitized films, we were able to confirm that when static on the water surface, Ragovelia is only supported by its foreleg and its hind leg. So from the schematic illustration, we can see that on the mid-leg cross-section, there's no dimple created, there's no buoyancy on act. However, when it does touch the water, once upon its skating, unlike the Gyaris, it doesn't make any dimple or any asymmetry. Instead, they actually opens their pretarsal swimming fence, and that's the very unique thing about these Ragovelia. So these specialized swimming fans are from a cleft on the posterior surface of the last tarsal segment of the mid-leg, and it penetrates the water film upon contact and expands during the thrust stroke, and it gives them enough propulsion for the body. So we suggest from this that Gyaris, while employing both the combination of hydrodynamic drag and surface tension force, the alternative mechanism that Ragovelia employs is only the hydrodynamic drag from the expansion of this pretarsal swimming fence. So we further provide slow motion films of the Gyaris latiodominis and the Ragovelia distincta. So from the Gyaris, we can demonstrate that its mid-legs is deforming the water surface during the stroke, and it is operating functionally as a virtual oar, pushing the leg so the body can gain some propulsion. But the Ragovelia distincta is demonstrated to how you can see the surface dimples are essentially absent during the stroke, and it provides the evidence that only the specialized fans penetrate the water surface into the water body. And from here, we are going to characterize the area in contact with the aqueous body, which is the water, as the wetted leg. And this wetted leg is extended from the tibia to the tarsus in the Gyaris, and only the tarsus in Ragovelia. And from this, we can also calculate the length of the wetted leg, which officially refers to the length of the contacted area with the aqueous body. For the data collection, we use the digital analyzing tool called Tracker, and the desired points of the body of the two species were marked individually frame to frame, and each providing a coordinate on the XY plane. And these coordinates were then converted into numeric distances by scales that's provided with the video that we filmed. And each individual film was ensured to include a single full thrust stroke as demonstrated in the films. And from the conversion of these coordinates into numeric distances, we are able to compare the mid-leg movement and employment between the Gyaris latiodominis and Ragovelia distincta, and officially the dynamics of the strides from the analysis of the body speed profiles during the stroke. So from these calculations, we are able to compare the two alternative mechanisms that the two species employ in their body movement. Sorry. So the first data collection was in calculation of the angular speed, and as aforementioned, because the Gyaris latiodominis only has not only, but mainly has a mid-leg movement at the coxae. We only calculated the angular speed at the coxal movement in the gyrus abdominis as demonstrated, restricted to the single full stroke. And likewise in the angular speed of Ragavalia distincta at the coxal movement of the mid-leg, but because they have more successive movement throughout their joints, we also calculated the angular speed between its femur and tibia, and also the tibia and the tarsus. We further calculated 3 complementary angles, and we did this to discuss the efficiency of the 2 alternative solutions for producing thrust for striding locomotion on the water surface. The first complementary angle 1 was calculated between the directional axis of the body, which is the dotted line, and the direction of the wetted leg movement, which is the single line. And from the angle calculation, we then converted it and used it in trigonometric calculation by putting it under cosine of the given angle. And this was to evaluate the proportion of the wetted leg velocity employed in the direction of the body movement. And from here, we theorized that a value that approximates closer to 1 would indicate optimal employment of the wetted leg in the forward propulsion of the body. Similarly, with the complementary angle 2, we also calculated an angle, but this time between the directional axes of the body, once again the dotted line, but this time with the wetted leg, which is the single line here. And once again, we put the respective angle under trigonometric calculation, this time by putting a sine. And this was to evaluate the proportion of the wetted leg length employed in the direction of the body movement. And we also theorized here that a value that approximates closer to 1 would indicate an optimal employment of the wetted leg in the forward propulsion of the body. The third and the last complementary angle was calculated between the directional axes of the wetted leg, which is a dotted line, and the wetted leg itself, which is a single line. And this was to evaluate whether and when the wetted leg is employed at its full length. So throughout the stroke, we theorized that an angle that approximates closer to 90 degrees would indicate optimal employment of the wetted leg in the thrust movement of the legs. Okay, sorry. Can I switch to the PDF really quick? Sorry, I did not expect this. Okay, that is better. So from the accumulated data, with the individually digitized and calculated videos, we calculated average angular speeds, and we put them together and amalgamated them into one. And as you can see, the color coordination is done for the faster duration, which is faster, shorter duration for the faster strides and the longer duration for the slower strides between the two species. And this particular figure shows the coxal movement, average angular speeds between the Garis and the Ragavalia. And each number at the point that was off just now in the presentation, they're the number of videos used in the average calculation. And the vacant, hollowed out points are because no standard error was calculated when the video number fell below a 4, so it will be insignificant. And as I just mentioned, the two figures are between the coxal movement average angular speeds. And as you can see, Garis and Ragavalia share a similar range of angular speeds between the coxal movement, and they both achieve their peak mid-stride between their stroke. And these two figures are for Ragavalia because, as aforementioned, they have more successive control over their joints. So we have average angular speed at their femur and tibia joint and their tibia and tarsus joint. But as we have already seen, the angular speeds generated at the coxal movement is the significant one that is converted into the forward propulsion of the body. So we did not put as much significance into the successive joint movement in the Ragavalia, but because we know that the wetted leg is extended from the tibia to tarsus in Garis and the tarsus only in Ragavalia, we wanted to analyze more into what's actually happening at the wetted leg, which is why we generated theoretical ideas of efficiency profiles that I just mentioned and explained during the complementary angles. So going into that, the complementary angle data, so these are after the trigonometric convergence. And from the first complementary angle, we can see that the optimal employment of the wetted leg in the forward propulsion of the body was achieved from the beginning of the strife with the Khare, but differently in Rogovalia, more towards the middle. And similar patterns are shown when we're looking at the second complementary angle that I introduced. Once again, beginning of the stride for the optimal employment in Khare, but mid-stride for Rogovalia. Similar patterns are demonstrated when we're discussing the last complementary angle that we discussed when we said that the optimal employment is approximated at 90 degrees. Once again, with the Khare, it is achieved from the beginning of the stride, but with the Rogovalia, more towards the middle of the stride. Regardless of these differences in the comparison of the wetted length velocity, which refers to the average velocity of the horizontal striding motion of the wetted length in respect to the directional axes of the body movement, Khare and Rogovalia once again share a similar range of velocities, but in this particular scenario, Rogovalia has a higher starting point of velocity than Khare. With the discussed average angular speeds and the complementary angles as inputs, we further analyze the total area swept by the wetted legs, hence the average sweeping speeds as outputs between the Khare latia abdominis and Rogovalia distincta. As illustrated, the total area swept refers to the total water surface area that is swept by the wetted legs between the two species, and respectively, the average sweeping speed would be that total area swept divided by the duration of the stride. So from these given figures, we can see that there is a significant difference between the two species. So Khare covering a significantly larger area in its stride, hence faster sweeping speed than Rogovalia. And given the different employment of wetted legs and respective outcomes, we compared also the body profiles of the final body speeds attained by the two species. And in this particular circumstances, between the two species, there was no significant differences demonstrated within the single thrust stroke forward propulsion. But because of this discrepancy, we wanted to see and analyze the conversion of the wetted leg variables into the forward propulsion of the body. And we further processed some calculations between the final body speed against the total area swept and the final body speed against the average sweeping speed. So as aforementioned, total area swept and average sweeping speed was significantly higher in the Khare, but final body speed was similar between the Khare and Rogovalia, but interestingly enough, between the comparison, we could see that there is a significantly larger conversion in Rogovalia, given a much smaller total area swept and average sweeping speed than Khare. Okay. So conclusions. So the duration of stroke was longer in Khare than in Rogovalia, within the single thrust stroke of the middle leg, and I would like to recount that between the two, they employ a very different alternative mechanism in the thrust generation. So Khare employs surface tension force and hydrodynamic drag, but Rogovalia only employs their hydrodynamic drag from the swimming fence. And because Khare latia abdominis had an average wetted leg length of 8.42 millimeter in comparison to Rogovalia, who had an average wetted leg length of 1.85 millimeter, it was natural that the total area swept and average sweeping speed was higher in Khare. But regardless of that, the conversion into the outcome, which calculated was into final body speed, was significantly higher in the Rogovalia. So with all that, we were able to put conclusion to suggest that Rogovalia distincta experiences a larger drag resistance, eventually thrust, per unit wetted leg length from its deployment and expansion of their swimming fence inside the water body, while Khare produces smaller thrust per wetted leg length from its virtual oar, so they don't actually have an oar that does not penetrate the water surface. But because Khare has a much longer wetted leg lengths and covering a larger area sweeping during the thrust stroke, they eventually end up sharing a similar range of average angular speeds and final body speed. And that will be the end of my presentation. I'm sorry I had to rush at the end. Thank you very much.
Okay. Now we have 2 minutes for 2 questions.
So, do you have the intention and the means to examine how much energy is spent in between these 2 types of movement, and which one would be more effective?
At the moment, no. The problem was that, thank you. So the problem was the Garris Altium Dominus was obtained in Korea within our campus, but Ragobalia was obtained in Arizona. And because of COVID restraints, we weren't able to travel out to obtain more specimens. So we only had the films from previous travels. So I didn't have any live specimens for me to do any more investigation, which is why this is more in the earlier projects. But once I get the opportunity to get my hands on them, I'll definitely do more energy profile calculations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I love a good bit of movement analysis. Nice work. So in terms of then their biology, what does this mean in terms of their efficiency to capture prey or to avoid predators, for instance?
So when it comes to bestriding, I do not know, at least I do not have any prior knowledge into how striding specifically correlates into anti-predatory behavior or any other biological behavior, because from my understanding, jumping is more involved in that, which will be more discussed by my colleague in the next presentation. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that because they employ 2 different mechanisms, more than it being involved in the anti-predatory locomotion, I think it's more correlated to the habitat they're involved in, because Garris is typically, they're the typical water striders, right? They're pond skaters. So they're normally at ponds or lakes that are typically stagnant, or there's a lot of emergent properties and vegetations on the water surface. Mm-hmm. So they don't typically need to obtain such significant propulsion when it comes to their body movement. But when it comes to Ragobalia, they're water crickets, and they're also known as riffle bugs. Mm-hmm. So they need to obtain significantly more thrust per wetted leg, as I've mentioned in my part at the end in my conclusion. They are typically found in fast-running waters in subtropical regions or tropical regions. Mm-hmm. So I think it is more associated with that. But maybe there's more into it that I'm not aware of.
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, no more time. C'est la vie. Sorry. We give way the next presentation. Size-dependent adaptation for locomotion in Khare for Woojoo Kim.
I'm Woojoo Kim, who is studying locomotion of water strider. So today I will tell you the size-dependent adaptations for locomotion in Khare. So first, you can see there's 2 species below. The left one looks quite large. This is Ventometer gigas, which size is heavier, 10 times heavier than normal size water strider that usually have been studied. And right side of it, also a large one, Ptilomera tigerina. And that size is 2 or 3 times heavier than normal size water strider. So first, I will introduce the basic mechanism of jumping and striding. And next, I will see details of each part, jumping and striding of water strider. So, okay. So the semi-aquatic animals are good subject to study allometry of animal. since you can see they live on the air-water interface. And this air-water interface, you can see there's lots of forces acting there. And this importance of which forces are depending on the size of animal. So here's a two locomotion that I chose. The left one is jumping first. That is already a study about jumping of water strider, about their mechanism of jumping and optimization of it. But the thing is, they only focus on the small and medium size of water strider, so they don't have this large size water strider in their paper. And plus, right side, next striding, is there's also lots of paper, including like fluidic dynamics paper, but they also focused on usually this symmetric striding. You can see the left and right, the middle leg use same time, and also usually focus on how they get thrust when they stride. So here's a paragraph. This x-axis, you can think the downward stroke as a size of water strider, and y-axis, you can think that is as how fast the water strider use their leg when they jump. So the dashed line is mathematical lines that the threshold of water surface breaking. So if water strider is under it, you can see this observed area, the empirical data. The small size water strider, they don't break the water surface, and it has been already known that if they break the water surface, the jump performance is getting bad. So that is the reason. But however, you can see this right side, the Ptolematerial and Gigantometer gigas for my subject. They are quite larger than the biggest one from previous paper. So we think they using existing theory without surface breaking, or they can use alternative mechanism with surface breaking when they jump. So we record in the Vietnam, in their natural habitat, we capture them into the water tank and film them with high-speed video. And this is Gigantometer gigas. You can see they break the water surface when they jump. So we digitize the video to get basic kinematics. So you can see first, Gigantometer gigas on the left side, they break the water surface when they jump. And also another larger water strider, Ptolematerial, they break the water surface when they jump. So they use different mechanism. And also, you can see there's an air layer around their leg after they break the water surface. So this is kinematic data from empirical result. You can see this x-axis, the time duration of jumping, and y-axis, body height, velocity, and acceleration. And what is important in there, the yellow shaded area, which means the transition phase when they break the water surface. So before these yellow marks, before they break the water surface, they only can use surface tension. And after that, they can utilize the drag for their jumping. So you can see the right side, the momentum gain accumulated, divided by the phases. So you can see these Gigantometer gigas get a lot of forces and momentum from drag also, not only surface tension. So we modified previous model. We divided 3 phases of jumping, the zero, stationary situation when they're just floating on the water surface, and then they start to move their leg and getting surface tension for their jump. And after that, after that break occurs, they use drag for their jump. So this is the main point of modified our new model. So this is model simulation result. You can see this x-axis as a time, y, the body heights and forces, and all these circles are empirical data that we digitized. And this solid line in A is a result of model simulation. So looks quite well. We built the model correctly. And this dashed line underneath, we tested what happened if they don't have air layer around the leg. So you can see the jump performance is quite getting bad if they don't have air layer around the leg. So after we build model correctly, now we can test what happened if the large size water strider don't break the water surface, and also small size water strider if they break the surface. So this is the result. X-axis is how fast they use their leg for jump. And y-axis, we first test the takeoff velocity. Since their jumping behavior is anti-predator behavior on the water surface, so if they can jump faster, it will be better for them. So you can see if water strider use their leg fast enough, the blue dots, they can break the water surface and using drag. And before that, orange dots, red dots, if they move their leg slow enough, they don't break the water surface and use only surface tension. And you can see this left 3 large size water strider, if they use drag with water surface breaking, they have better performance of jumping. While the smaller water surface, however, if they use quite faster leg than their normal speed, even they use drag, their jump performance is worse than only surface tension. So this is more research about maximum height of jumping. Looks quite similar. So this is a summary of my simulation. There's 3 dots in A for yellow, red, blue with a large size water strider. They're above the threshold line. They break the water surface. Unlike the Aquarius Polhemous under the threshold line. And BC is a summary, the proportion or ratio of jump performance with drag divided by jump performance of surface tension jump. So you can see the 3 large water strider are above later one, which means they're better when they use drag with surface braking, unlike the small size water strider. And next, the striding of water strider. Like I said before, lots of paper is about striding water strider, but you can see there's a lot of paper only focused on symmetrical striding, left and right leg, and thrusting, how they get thrust. But however, in 1999, they already reported that gigantometer gigas use asymmetric striding on the water. They use one middle leg and contralateral hind leg to get thrust, while another middle leg stretch forward. So we film them in their natural habitat. So video is not working. Okay, left one is not working. Yeah. Well, you're supposed to see this. Gigantometer gigas use asymmetric striding on the left side. And right side, you can see the Pitulma tigrina use symmetrical striding, like others. So first, we tested, because gigantometer gigas, if they use asymmetric striding, they don't use foreleg to their striding locomotion. So we think their leg proportion can be different with other. So we have these 6 study species. We have leg measurement. You can see x-axis, the size of water strider. And y-axis, you can think this as A, the relative length of foreleg, and middle leg, and hind leg. What is important here is the foreleg. You can see that they are clearly grouping this normal size water strider in the middle. And Pitulma tigrina have quite longer foreleg, while gigantometer gigas have shorter foreleg, as we expected, since they don't use foreleg. So we group them as 3 categories: balanced, long foreleg, and short foreleg. And you can also see there looks like some trend when water strider are getting larger and larger. Their foreleg getting longer or shorter. And this is also true in this reconstructed data from Mazda 1960. You can see this Pitulma has longer foreleg when their body length is getting longer, while this Garine, the end of it, the gigantometer gigas, they have shorter foreleg. So we divided this striding into 2 phases, first thrust phase and next passive phase. In thrust phase, they can use asymmetric thrust or symmetric thrust, and then they can slide on the water surface asymmetrically or symmetrically, or they can just leap over the water surface. And this is how we observe really in their natural habitat. You can see this gigantometer gigas on the right side. They have short foreleg, and they always use asymmetric striding, while Pitulma tigrina has long foreleg, and they always use symmetric striding. And you can see this balanced with smaller size water strider. They can choose their behavior depending on the situation. So we built another model about sliding on the water surface. Now it's getting complicated, so I need you to focus. Now, first we test if the water strider can float on the water surface or not. So you can see this posterior side of the water strider. They can always be supported by 2 hind legs, so there's no problem. But in the other case, anterior part, they should support their anterior part of the body with 1 middle leg or 2 short foreleg. So we tested they can float or not. So we first divided the solid line and dashed line to their behaviors, symmetric or asymmetric sliding. And then we tested what happened if they have short foreleg, long foreleg, and balanced. So first of all, you can think this y-axis. This is how much force they needed to support their anterior part. And this x-axis is a wetted leg parameter. You can think this as how much force they can produce to their anterior part of the body. So first, we can see in any case, if water strider, whether they have long or short foreleg, if they use asymmetric sliding, they can always float on the water surface because they have long enough middle leg. On the other hand, if you see the CDE, if water strider getting larger, they have two options. First one, as I told you before, they can use asymmetric sliding with one middle leg, or they have to long foreleg, have long foreleg if they want to use symmetric sliding on the water. So, and also this balanced small size water strider, their balanced geometry as their natural habitat, they are just below the line, so they can float on the water surface. And then we calculate the resistance of their sliding position. And by the resistance, we calculate the deceleration of sliding. So we focused on this Aquarius paludum, which can choose their behavior. They can use all three types of sliding. And you can check also when their velocity is getting faster, the deceleration, the differences of deceleration between asymmetric and symmetric and asymmetric sliding is getting larger. So we expect they may choose their behavior depending on their body velocity. So this is the result. You can see when they use asymmetric sliding, their body speed is faster. And plus, when they use asymmetric sliding, they slide longer distance and longer duration, which is better for them because they have less deceleration when they slide asymmetrically. So here's a summary. First, jumping off Gary Day. If water striders are getting larger, the large size one, they should break the water surface and the small size water striders, they should not break the water surface when they jump for their jumping performance. And striding, next, large size water strider, they have two options to float on the water surface. First one, they should have longer foreleg like Tigrina, or second, they should use asymmetric sliding like Gigantometra gigas. And while the small size water strider, they can choose their behavior depending on their velocity that affects the deceleration of sliding. Thank you very much. And we always welcome for more collaborators to have more behavior data points across the species. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Yes.
So the hairs on the leg that the larger Jareds are using to help jump, where you took that figure with the
I'm sorry, can you speak more loudly?
Sure.
Yeah.
The hairs that you had on the legs of the larger Jareds, to help them with jumping because they're so big.
That is a very good question because the large size water strider, they use drag. And what is different with the drag and surface tension? In the surface tension, they don't need to have thick leg because the diameter doesn't matter to get larger surface tension. However, if water strider want to use drag, the projected area of the leg is quite important. So it is better if they have the thicker the leg diameter using like hair and with the air around the leg.
So are the hairs hydrophilic or phobic? Like how do
hair
they?
is clearly hydrophobic.
Okay.
And we also measure the morphology of hair data. And we confirm that the Gigantometra gigas has relatively longer hair than small size water strider.
Cool. Neat.
Hi, Woojoo. Thank you for the nice talk. So both Gigantometra and Telemetra are stream species, right?
Yeah.
So are these changes in locomotion behavior associated with the fact that they are on streams? Or do you see these changes also in large water striders that specialize in calm waters?
That is also a good question, because we already know that Gigantometra gigas and Petilometra lives on flowing water. But however, gigas live less flowing, well, kind of stagnant water. And already we showed that despite this deceleration is less effective to the size of water strider. And when they use asymmetric striding, they have less deceleration, so that will be good for Gigantometra gigas. But however, Petilometra use symmetrical striding, which makes more deceleration. But we think, as you guys see, that they live quite fast flowing water. We think probably they need two middle leg to stride enough with enough thrust, because their natural habitat is the flow of natural habitat is too fast. That is our guessing.
Okay, in these kind of sizes, when they use the underwater drag force, does like Reynolds numbers play some role, or are those like too large objects?
Oh, that is another good question. Well, I'm sorry, but I didn't test the Reynolds number in the striding case, but I test the Reynolds number to the jumping behavior of water strider, and found out that Gigas and Polhemous, their Reynolds number start to make drag is large enough to contributing for their jumping.
And how does it interfere? Like, do you count the Reynolds number from the water bubble or just from the surface of the lake?
I'm sorry?
When you calculate the Reynolds number, do you calculate it like from the surface of the water bubble enveloping the lake, or from the lake itself?
I tested the lake itself with the air around the lake.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, any more? Yes, the last question.
Thanks. As I'm obsessed by predation, so because they're jumping out of the water, does that mean that they potentially get predated on by, say, fish or something that's under the water that's having a go at them?
Well, I'm sorry that I'm not quite good at the ecologic meaning, but as I know, they're threat probably from the fish, and yeah. And also, when we make them jump on the water, we usually use visual cue, and visual cue is usually like wire under the water, and that makes them to jump.
Thank you. Good. The last expositor of these blogs is Chang, Michael Raupach, about an extensive phylogenomic analysis of the Herridae, including the use of the old museum specimens.
Thank you. Hello, do you hear me? Okay. Yes, thank you for the possibility to give this talk here. Normally I would give a first introduction into water striders or geromorpha in terms of such a topic, but here I skip it completely. And I directly jump to the Geride, which I'm working with, focusing a little bit with. It's a monophyletic taxon within the geromorpha. We have about 750 described species. They're distributed about in 70 genera and at least at 8 recognized subfamilies, and I will give a short presentation of these families, some representatives to get an idea about the variability and the species. For example, here, the first one, the Chamotometrine, they look a little bit like this. The next one, the Cylindrostetine, somewhat similar. The Eotrichine, they look a little bit different. The abdomen is a little bit modified, and you see this very elongated hind and mid legs. The Gerine, they are the most abundant ones here in Europe. Almost all are part of this family, and they are most familiar to us here. No need to say any more about the Halobatine. Then we have the Telomerine. They are really large specimens, and they have a really differentiated reproduction system and genitalia. And finally, the Ragadotarsine, also a very strange group of water striders with a very specific abdomen. And finally, the Trepobatine, here with Tetibates serena, it looks also a little bit strange and Halobates-like this way. Okay, the first phylogenetic hypothesis about the Gerine was done by Matsuda in 1960, so some years ago, and he distributed, or he found 5 different clades. The Trepobatine, the Ragadotarsine as sister groups to all other ones. The Halobatanine, he wasn't sure if it is a monophyletum or not. The Gerine and the Telomerine, and all other mentioned subfamilies just previously were part of the Gerine. And this took place some years, and Niels Müller-Andersen and Tom Weir upworked the phylogeny of the Gerine in 2004, and you see here now a little bit, some differences. We now see the well-known 8 subfamilies, the Chamatometrine, Cylindricine again, and we see the Gerine as sister group to the Eotrichine, as well as the Ptilomerine to the Halobatine. And of course, with the rise of the molecules and the molecular techniques, a first study was done by Jakob Damgaard across a complete geromorpha, and he also highlighted a little bit the geride, and his results showed that the Ptilomerine and the Halobatide were sister groups to all other ones, including the Cylindricite as paraphyletic group. We see the Trepobatine and the Ragadotasine as sister group to the remaining 4 ones. So it's quite interesting. There are some really serious changes in the phylogeny of this group. And there was another study by Jakob some years later, but they were focusing only on the Gerine and the Eotrichine in this context. They used about 2,000 base pairs of a number of different protein coding genes and RNA genes, and they found out that the Gerine are in fact a paraphyllum, and the Eotrichine are nested within the Gerine. So now we have the possibility to get more data, more molecular data, and maybe some better ways to analyze this data. And we started approach to use high throughput sequencing to get data from the Geride. An approach called genome skimming, and it's whole genome shotgun sequencing. We are generating a lot of small particles or sequences with a length of 150 base pairs. And from this bulge of sequences we generate, we then extract specific markers. First, mitochondrial genomes, nuclear RNA cluster genes, 18S, 5.8S, and 28S, as well as the histone cluster and also some other ones. And of course, there's a question. If we use now such methods, why using genome skimming and not fancy transcriptomes or UCEs? And why using only such a small data set in comparison to the thousands of anonymous genes we can generate? And here are the answers. First, all used markers are well known. We know about their advantages as well as their disadvantages. They're established for many years and they are quite useful. Second, we can include already published sequences as well as numerous unpublished ones by Jakob Damgaard, which were done in the past, and it's a mess not to use them. And we do not have to rely on fresh material. We can also use old collection specimens in order to cover all important lineages. So let's take a look about the available data. It's a travel into time. Actually, we are somewhere here, 2020, 22. Most specimens that have been collected here in Central Europe and worked up were part of our barcoding study, which was published 2018. And for these specimens, it was no problem to get complete mitochondrial genome data, as well as 18S, 28S data. So that was not a problem. But let's go back a little bit more in the past. For example, here, Amemboa cristata, which was sampled in 1994. We also were able to get the complete mitochondrial genome as well as the other markers. Or here, 1990, it's Natatulana. And here also got the complete RNA cluster, not the complete mitochondrial genome, there were some parts missing. We go more back into the history, and here we have Asclepicus apicalis. It was collected in 1978, so the age is increasing. Complete data for the specimen. Platygerys asymmetricus, collected 1970, so more than 50 years old, older than my person. or here, Ovatometra obesa, collected in 1964. We got almost the complete mitochondrial genome, only the control region is missing, and the complete RNA clusters and so on. And this is actually the end. A specimen, Halobates micans, collected 1937, 85 years old, and we got almost the complete mitochondrial genome, as well as full RNA sequences, full histone sequences. So what about the mitochondrial genomes? How do they look like? They look quite similar to the ancestral insect phylogen mitochondrial genomes. There's only a small switch from transfer RNA, which is moved from the ancestral one to the type B order. Here I've visualized the mitochondrial genome of Geras argentatus to get an impression. We see these typical protein coding genes and the RNAs and the control regions and so on. So now the data and the data analysis. We compiled a data set of 558 taxa, and these included 36 gerids. We have the mitogenomes with 13 protein coding genes and 2 rRNA genes. And we have the nuclear genes, 18S, 28S. In order to delimitate the hypervariable regions, we use G blocks. They were aligned using MAFT. Then we have 5.8S RNA, and the histone genes, they made no problems in terms of alignment. So the total alignment was about more or less 20,000 base pairs, and that's quite okay. The results I will show you now are really preliminary and absolutely simplified. It's a maximum likelihood tree using IQ tree, and we use the substitution model simplified by GTR and 10,000 ultra-fast bootstrapping, and here we got it. So this is a topology. We see that most nodes got a really good support, and we also see that the geride are monophyletic. This is not a surprise. We see the telomeride and halobatide as sister groups, and as well as sister groups to all other ones. We see a sister group relationship of the cylindristide and the chamatometrine. The trepobatine are also sister group to the remaining ones, and most important, we see also the eotrichine nested within the gerine. And now let's take a look on the differences between our topology, our new topology, to the Damgaard topology. We see it here now. It's quite more or less identical in terms of the upper region. So telomeride and halobatine are presenting a well-supported clade. But then we see that the chamatometrine and cylindrostitine are presenting a monophyletic clade with high support. And as Jakob also demonstrated in the past, the eotrichine are nested within the gerine. So we can now even come to the summary. Genome skimming is, in my eyes, in our eyes, a really useful molecular approach to generate genomic data, and as I pointed out, even up to specimens of an age of 85 years. Mitochondrial genomes combined with nuclear markers are really a powerful approach to reconstruct the phylogeny of the geride. And I also would like to give an outlook of our project. We would like to add missing data. We are, as I pointed out, there are some taxa missing. For example, the ragadotarsine, we have no data at the moment available, and some other genera, species-rich genera, have not been worked up at the moment. For example, Naboantelus or Potamobates, material is there, but it's also a question of time and sometimes also money. And what's also missing, I would like to add the leaves to the tree, because the data I show you now, we're really relying only on the phylogenomic data I generated. But I also plan to implement, as pointed out before, the data which were generated by Jakob in the next step. So we are increasing the topology and the data set significantly in terms of species. And of course, we also want to make absolutely more detailed and fine-scaled analysis, including also a molecular clock. So this will be continued, so watch it out. And finally, not finally, but as a second step, I used some nice images from water striders, and they are part of a really nice DVD which can be get by Gerhard Strauss. You may take a look at Corisa.de, and he's making really amazingly nice images of bugs, true bugs from Central Europe, and also some exotic ones. I give you here some examples with nice biogeographic data. I think they are really impressive. And I have also a request. If I do not tell anyone, I think it's the best chance to do it here. I'm interested in Geres Coste from the Pyrenees. Maybe somebody has some. It would be really cool to get some specimens. Ideally, ethanol fix, it depends a little bit, but not so old specimens. So if you have some specimens, just let me know. This would be really cool. Yeah, and now I would like to thank some people, Frank Laaf, Lars Hinrich, and Polhemous for providing material and determination. Isabel Stöger for the lab works. And maybe, oh yeah, the NSSB Pakt für Forschung und Innovation for funding. Sven Erno Bika is a guy who has a really nice sequencing lab, and he was really helpful in analyzing our data. And you for your interest, finally. And one personal comment at the end of this talk. We should be aware that we are not living in a bubble. Really, really bad things are happening in the East, and we should be aware of it. And we should also remember of our friends and colleagues in Ukraine. That's all. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Yes.
I was just curious why you used histone for one of your gene groups, because I know when I used it for myriads, there were multiple copies, so I actually had to throw out that whole data set because there was at least 2 to 3 copies for H3. Have you run into that with Jarity?
Well,
or are you just using it for...
The fragment size was not so large. We have a fragment of about 300 or 400 base pairs, and there were, you're right, the sequences are making problems. We have within these genes not a lot, but some wobbles in a way, indicating the presence of multiple copies. But it doesn't affect the topology really seriously in this way.
Okay, it's neat stuff. Cool.
If I would use, for example, ITS2 or ITS1, this would be really seriously problematic.
Yeah, I couldn't get those to work from Jakob either.
Yes.
Hey, thank you for the talk. And this is sort of a question/comment. So you lumped transcriptomes and UCEs sort of in the same category of maybe do not do that, do genome skimming instead. But I just wanted to point out, and if you do UCEs, you will, as bycatch, also get ribosomal data as well as mitochondrial genes. So you essentially get that same information that you get using genes.
This is absolutely true. We have also UCE loci in our data set, but this is an over next step. We will analyze them separately.
Okay, okay. No, I just wanted to say that, you know, you get the same type of stuff.
We have checked our data set for the presence of UCEs, and there are a lot of UCEs present. Of course, the quality decreases sometimes, and we did not start any analysis at the moment because we are actually focusing on the compilation of the existing data. But the UCE study are in progress more or less. But this will be a topic in 4 years or so, or 8, or 12, or whatever.
Any more? Okay, thank you. Good. Thank you for your attention. We finish for now and invite you for coffee break.
Just a minute. Those who speak tomorrow morning, or tomorrow, in general, tomorrow, please, you have time during the coffee break or later to give your presentations, because it's not so quick. after I have your presentation, I have to change the names to prepare that properly. So if you are so kind to pass, I will be at the end of the room for that, okay? Thank you to everyone for the cooperation.